The wound no one sees. Have you ever felt that something is unresolved between you and your father, but you can't explain exactly what it is? It's like a quiet ache, a heaviness in your chest when someone talks about their great relationship with their dad. Maybe you even avoid the topic. You tell yourself, it's in the past, it doesn't matter anymore. But deep down, it still echoes, still affects the way you live, the way you love, and the way you see yourself. Many adults walk through life with an invisible wound, a wound created not by what was said, but by what was never said, not by what was done, but by what was never done. A father who was emotionally distant, a father who only showed up to criticize, a father who was physically present but emotionally absent. And here's the hard truth, that absence becomes part of how we define love. We grow up thinking love is supposed to feel cold, or distant, or conditional. We think that being ignored means we're not enough, that being judged means we need to deserve affection. Virginia Satir, one of the most powerful family therapists in history, said that every person is deeply shaped by their first relationships, especially the ones we don't talk about, the silent ones, the ones where the child looked for approval and found only silence, where the child cried for connection and learned to stop crying because no one was coming. These invisible wounds are the ones that hurt the most because we don't even realize they're still open. We think we're just too sensitive or too insecure or too independent. But maybe, just maybe, we learned to be that way because our father never made room for our emotions, never saw the real us. And here's the most painful part. Some people grow up trying to become what their father would finally approve of, the perfect child, the silent one, the strong one. But that approval, it never comes because the wound was never about you. It was about him, his own pain, his own emotional limitations. But as a child, how could you know that? Virginia Satir reminds us that healing begins when we stop explaining our father's behavior and start acknowledging how it made us feel. It's not about blaming, it's about seeing clearly, because what you don't name continues to control you. And many people live their entire lives repeating that dynamic, choosing partners who remind them of their father, becoming parents who repeat the cycle, or carrying guilt for simply wanting more. Do you ever find yourself uncomfortable with affection, afraid to be vulnerable, pushing people away before they can hurt you? It's not weakness, it's a scar. And behind every scar, there was once a child hoping, just once, to hear, "I'm proud of you, I love you, you're safe." That child didn't hear it, so you grew up wondering if something was wrong with you. But Satir taught us something sacred. Children never create the emotional distance, they just adapt to it. If your father couldn't show love, it's because he never learned how. But you are not bound to that silence. You don't have to keep living behind that wall. Healing begins when you look at that part of your story, the part you never talk about, and allow yourself to feel, to grieve, to say, "That hurt me," to stop pretending it didn't matter, because it mattered. It shaped you, but it doesn't have to define you forever. You can choose something different now. You can stop chasing the approval that never comes. You can start giving yourself the care and presence you were denied. You are no longer that child. You are not helpless anymore, and you don't need to wait for your father to change to begin your healing. Virginia Satir said, "Life is not what they did to you. It's what you choose to do with it now." So let's begin here, not with blame, not with shame, but with truth. The wound may be invisible to others, but today you see it, and that is where healing begins. The blindness of idealization. Let's talk about something that keeps many people stuck in emotional pain without even realizing it: idealization. When we're children, we don't just love our parents, we need them. We depend on them for survival, food, shelter, safety, identity, and love. And because of that, even when they hurt us, abandon us, or remain cold and distant, we still try to see them as good. We still try to protect the image of, "My father could never be the problem." That's what idealization is. We don't see the person as they are. We see what we need them to be. And for many, that means spending a lifetime saying, "He did his best. He didn't know how to love. At least he didn't leave. I know he loved me in his own way." And maybe all of that is true. Maybe he really did do his best. But Virginia Satir would gently ask you, even if he did his best, how did his best affect you? Did you grow up feeling seen? Did you feel safe to express your emotions? Did you feel accepted? Or did you feel like you had to earn love by being perfect? You see, idealizing a father who didn't know how to connect emotionally doesn't heal the wound. It just hides it under layers of guilt, shame, and confusion. Because when we idealize someone who hurt us, even unintentionally, we turn their pain into our silence. We make their emotional limitations our responsibility, and we abandon our own truth to preserve an illusion. You may say, "But I feel bad blaming him. He also had a difficult life, and that might be true. Maybe he grew up with a father who was even colder. Maybe he was never taught to express affection. Maybe he was struggling with things he never spoke about. But here's the truth. Understanding your father's pain is not a replacement for recognizing your own. You can have compassion for his struggles and still acknowledge how his absence, coldness, or criticism affected you. Virginia Satir reminds us that we can only truly heal when we stop covering the wound with excuses. When we say, out loud, I missed something I needed. I wanted a hug that never came. I longed to be accepted for who I was, not for what I achieved. Many adults walk through life like emotional orphans. They had parents, but they didn't have connection. They had providers, but not protectors of the soul. And when you live without that kind of connection, you adapt. You learn to minimize your needs. You learn to stay quiet. You become the strong one, the silent one, the always okay one. But that strength is a mask. And under it, there's a child who still wonders, why wasn't I enough for him to come closer? Why didn't he try to know who I really was? When we idealize our father, we trap that child in silence. We say, it wasn't so bad. We say, he loved me. He just didn't know how to show it. We say, he was a good man, but we forget to ask, and how did that make me feel? Because your pain is not canceled out by his excuses. Your longing doesn't disappear just because he worked hard or put food on the table. Your truth matters. Your feelings are valid. Virginia Satir believed that no healing is possible without acknowledging reality, and the reality might be this. You loved a man who could never fully meet you. You needed a father, and instead you got a figure, someone you respected, someone you feared, someone you admired from a distance, but not someone who knew your heart, and that truth can hurt. But it can also set you free. Because once you stop idealizing, you can finally start seeing not just him, but yourself. You can begin to see the ways you adapted, the ways you coped, the ways you tried to carry both your pain and his. You can begin to grieve, not because you hate him, but because you finally understand what you needed and didn't receive. And from that grief comes a new kind of strength, the strength of someone who is no longer waiting to be seen, who chooses to see themselves now with honesty, with tenderness, with the courage to say, he was who he was, but I will no longer abandon who I am. Because healing doesn't come from pretending, it comes from truth. And the truth is this: you deserved more. You still do. When the father becomes a god or a ghost, every child begins life seeing their father as something greater than human, a protector, a provider, a model of what is right, what is strong, what is true. But what happens when that father doesn't protect, doesn't connect, doesn't truly see you? Virginia Satir teaches us that in childhood, a father becomes a kind of emotional mirror. And if that mirror is cracked, foggy, or simply not there, the child doesn't say, my father has a problem. The child says, something must be wrong with me. There are two types of paternal absence that wound deeply. The father who becomes a god, impossible to reach, always right, emotionally untouchable. And the father who becomes a ghost, emotionally invisible, physically present but hollow, someone who drifts through your life without ever truly arriving. Let's talk first about the god. This is the father whose word is final, who commands respect but gives no emotional access, who seems perfect, strong, untouchable. You try to impress him, but never quite succeed. You seek closeness, but feel unworthy. You long for his approval, but it always seems out of reach. This dynamic creates a deep emotional hunger, a constant need to earn love, prove yourself, stay perfect. And the saddest part? You might still be trying today. As an adult, you may seek out partners who are emotionally distant. You may struggle with self-worth because nothing ever feels good enough. All because your father was placed on a pedestal and you were left climbing, forever reaching. Now let's look at the ghost. This father is there, but not really. He may have worked long hours, kept his distance, avoided emotional conversations. You remember his silence more than his voice, his absence more than his presence. He didn't hurt you directly, but his absence left a vacuum. And that vacuum, it shaped everything. You may have become independent too early. You may have learned not to ask for help. You may have started believing that love means being alone. Virginia Satir would say that both the god and the ghost leave the same scar, the feeling that love is unreachable, that emotional safety doesn't exist, that no one will really see or choose you. It's subtle, but powerful. The voice that says, don't need too much. Don't expect too much. Don't speak your truth. It might scare people away, so you keep your needs small. You become the caregiver, the fixer, the one who holds it all together. And inside, a silent child still asks, why didn't he want to know me? Why didn't he try to understand me? But here's the truth that heals. Your father's emotional limitations were not your fault. Whether he seemed too perfect to reach or too distant to touch, the impact on you was real. And healing begins the moment you stop trying to explain it away. Satir said that we don't become whole by rewriting the past, but by understanding it. That means letting go of illusions. Your father was not a god, and he doesn't have to remain a ghost. You can face the truth. He didn't know how to meet your emotional needs. He didn't have the tools to connect deeply. Maybe no one ever taught him how. But that doesn't erase what you missed, and it doesn't erase your right to grieve. You may never hear the words you wanted. You may never receive the hug you longed for, but you can stop carrying the silence. You can speak your truth now. You can stop seeing yourself as not enough and start seeing your father as he truly was. A man with wounds of his own, a man who couldn't give what he didn't have, and that shift changes everything. You no longer have to chase the unreachable. You no longer have to prove your worth. You can stop climbing the pedestal. You can stop waiting in the empty room, because now you're the one who can choose presence. You can show up for yourself. You can become the safe place you never had. Virginia Satir believed that when we break the illusion, we break the cycle. We stop living through the eyes of the abandoned child, and we begin living as the adult who chooses to love fully and freely. So, today, if your father was a ghost, name it. If he was a god you could never reach, release him. He was never meant to define your worth. You were always worthy, even in silence, even in distance, even in the absence of everything you needed. And now, you can give yourself the gift he couldn't. Truth, presence, healing, the unfinished quest for approval. How long have you been trying to hear these words from your father? I'm proud of you. You did well. I see you. For many, those words never came, and yet they still wait. Not always consciously, but somewhere deep inside, there's a longing, a need to be recognized, to be seen, not just for what you did, but for who you are. Virginia Satir believed that a child's identity is profoundly shaped by how their parents responded to their essence, not just their behavior. When a father only noticed achievements and never emotions, when he only praised silence, obedience, or toughness, the child learns to become invisible in order to be good. You start chasing approval like it's the only form of love you know. You work harder. You push yourself beyond limits. You succeed and succeed and succeed again. And still, you feel like it's not enough because it was never about the external. It was always about that moment you hoped for. The day your father would finally look at you with pride, warmth, connection. The day he would finally see you fully. But many never get that moment. And so the quest continues. It moves from the father to bosses, partners, friends, even strangers. You seek validation in your job, in your performance, in being useful, in being needed. You become addicted to being enough, but enough for whom? Virginia Satir reminds us of something crucial. What we didn't receive from our father, we often spend a lifetime trying to earn elsewhere. We become adults still trapped in a childhood loop, trying to win love, trying to earn belonging, trying to prove we're not a disappointment. The tragedy is that many people don't even realize they're doing this. They think they're just ambitious, or just perfectionists, or just high achievers. But behind the drive, there's often a silent plea. Will someone please tell me I'm finally okay? Here's the truth. Approval is not the same as love. Recognition is not the same as connection, and performance will never heal emotional neglect. You may have become the successful one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems. But deep down, you're tired. Tired of chasing, tired of pretending, tired of building a life around a hole that was never supposed to exist. Satir believed that healing starts the moment we turn inward and ask, whose approval are you still chasing? And what would happen if you stopped? It's a terrifying thought, because that chase gave your life structure. It gave you a mission, but it also robbed you of peace. It stole your freedom to just be. You were taught that love must be earned, but that's not love. That's performance. That's survival. So what if, just for a moment, you stopped running? What if you let the silence fall and listened to the child inside who once stood in front of his father hoping for a smile and never got it? That child doesn't need to keep proving anything. He needs to be held. He needs to be heard. He needs someone to finally say, you don't have to earn love. You are lovable simply because you exist. that someone can be you. Yes, your father may never say the words you long to hear. He may never have the emotional capacity to recognize your soul, but that doesn't mean you have to live in that emptiness forever. You can stop asking questions that only bring pain. Why didn't he love me? What else could I have done? Why wasn't I enough? And instead you can ask, what did I need that I never received? What parts of me have I silenced to be acceptable? Am I willing to start choosing myself, even if he never did? Virginia Satir often said, feelings of worth can flourish only in an atmosphere where individual differences are appreciated, mistakes are tolerated, communication is open, and rules are flexible. Did your father create that atmosphere? If not, no blame, just truth, because the truth sets you free. You are no longer a child. You don't need permission to stop chasing. You don't need approval to rest. You don't need his love to love yourself. That doesn't make your father bad. It makes you human, and it makes this moment sacred, because this is the moment you stop chasing a reflection that never looked back and start becoming someone who sees, loves, and honors your own reflection. The quest for approval may be unfinished, but the quest for healing, it starts today with you. The weight of the cold father, when love becomes ice. There are fathers who yell, fathers who hit, fathers who abandon, and then there are fathers who do none of that, but still leave behind a child full of emotional bruises. The cold father is not cruel in words. He doesn't scream. He doesn't beat. He simply doesn't connect. He's there, but not present. He provides, but doesn't nurture. He answers, but never asks. He exists in your life like furniture, visible, useful, silent. And for many, this is the hardest kind of pain to understand. Because how do you grieve something that was never there? Virginia Satir called this emotional starvation. It's when a child grows up surrounded by silence, distance, and unspoken rules like don't ask too many questions, don't talk about feelings, don't expect affection. You start to believe that love is supposed to feel cold, that being ignored is normal, that being emotionally invisible is just how families work. But something inside you knows this isn't right. You see other families hug, laugh, share openly, and you feel like a stranger to all of it. You wonder, why does warmth make me uncomfortable? Why do I freeze when someone says they love me? Why do I push people away the moment they get too close? It's because you were never taught how to hold love. You were never taught how to receive it. Because the person who should have taught you, your father, kept his heart behind a wall of ice. Maybe he thought that's what strength looked like. Maybe he believed that emotions made you weak. Maybe he never received affection himself and didn't know how to give what he never got. But here's what Satir would say. Children don't just need food and shelter. They need emotional touch points, a gentle voice, a smile of approval, a hand on the shoulder that says, I'm here. A question like, how are you really feeling? Without these, the child grows up emotionally numb or emotionally frantic, always searching for the warmth they never received, or protecting themselves from it out of fear it will vanish again. If your father was cold, chances are you grew up doubting your emotions. You learned to suppress your sadness. You learned to smile through pain. You learned to be strong even when you were falling apart. And now, you may be exhausted. You may feel lonely, even in a room full of people. You may long for intimacy, but feel terrified when it arrives. This is the weight of the cold father. Not an explosion, but a slow freeze. Not drama, but emotional silence. Not abuse, but neglect of the heart. But Virginia Satir reminds us what was missing can be named, and what is named can begin to heal. It starts by telling the truth. My father never hugged me. My father never asked me what I was feeling. My father never told me he was proud of me. Not to blame, not to punish, but to stop pretending you were unaffected, because you were affected. You were shaped by the silence. You were molded by what was never spoken. And now, as an adult, you get to do something powerful. You get to melt the ice. You get to feel again. You get to reconnect with the part of you that still wants to be held. You may have become emotionally self-sufficient, but that's not the same as being whole. You deserve warmth. You deserve to be listened to. You deserve to be emotionally safe, and you don't have to wait for your father to give it. You don't have to wait for him to change. You can begin giving to yourself what he could not. You can allow someone else to love you with gentleness. You can learn, slowly, cautiously, to be vulnerable again. Yes, it may feel foreign. Yes, it may feel scary, but you are not that abandoned child anymore. You are the adult who gets to say, I choose not to live behind glass. I choose to feel. I choose connection. Satir believed that healing from emotional coldness requires relearning intimacy, relearning trust, relearning that you don't have to earn attention. You deserve it simply because you exist. So today, take one small step toward warmth, speak one truth, feel one emotion, accept one gesture of kindness without pushing it away, because the ice may have kept you safe once, but now it's keeping you isolated, and you were never meant to be alone. The father who tried to control everything. Some fathers don't abandon, they don't ignore, they don't stay cold. Instead, they control. They want to know where you are, what you're doing, who you're becoming, and they want to decide it for you. At first, it can feel like involvement, like care, but very quickly, it becomes suffocating. Virginia Satir believed that many parents try to control their children not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of failure, fear of being judged, fear of their own inner chaos. And so they try to keep everything in order by keeping you under control. If your father was this way, you probably grew up feeling like your voice didn't matter. Your choices were questioned. Your emotions were dismissed. Your dreams were often replaced with his expectations. You didn't get to become, you were assigned a role. Maybe you had to be the responsible one, maybe the strong one, maybe the obedient child who never talks back. And any attempt to break out of that role, punished, dismissed, shamed, because control-based fathers see independence as threat, authenticity as rebellion, boundaries as disrespect. And so you learn to stay small, to shrink your truth, to second-guess your decisions, to fear your own freedom. Satir would say this kind of father creates an emotional prison. It's not built with walls. It's built with fear. Fear of disappointing him, fear of being wrong, fear of losing his approval if you ever disagree. And that fear doesn't end in childhood. It follows you. As an adult, you may struggle to trust your own judgment. You may feel guilty for setting boundaries. You may sabotage your dreams because somewhere deep inside, you still hear his voice saying, "That's not good enough. You should be doing something else. Who do you think you are?" It's like he moved out of your house, but not out of your head. Virginia Satir taught that control is not connection. True connection requires curiosity, flexibility, and the ability to see someone as they truly are, not as you want them to be. But your father couldn't see your uniqueness. He saw your potential to fail. He saw you as an extension of himself, not as an individual. So instead of being nurtured, you were managed. Instead of being encouraged, you were corrected. Instead of being trusted, you were monitored. And now, you might live with a constant sense of pressure, an invisible weight on your shoulders, a voice that says, "Don't mess this up," a need to get it right, even when no one's watching. That's not just personality, that's survival. It's what you had to become in a home where being yourself was risky. But here's the truth, you don't have to live under surveillance anymore. You're allowed to make your own choices. You're allowed to want something different. You're allowed to say, "That might have been your dream, Dad, but it's not mine." Satir would say that healing from a controlling parent means giving yourself back your own life, reclaiming the parts of you that were buried under expectation, letting yourself explore, even if it means failing, letting yourself choose, even if it means going against what you were taught. And no, it's not easy, because part of you still wants to please him, still wants to avoid conflict, still hopes that maybe one day he'll finally say, "You made the right choice." But that day may never come. And you don't need it to, because you are not a reflection of his fears. You are not a product of his control. You are not responsible for protecting his image of you. You are your own person, and you're allowed to live a life that makes sense to you. So take a breath, listen to your own voice. Choose the thing that lights you up, even if he wouldn't understand it. You don't have to fight him. You just have to stop fighting yourself. And that is the beginning of freedom. The buried anger that turns into emotional illness. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't break plates. It doesn't explode. It sinks, deep, quiet, hidden beneath years of silence, smiles, and "I'm fine." It's the pain of anger that was never allowed. Anger that was buried because it wasn't safe to feel, because your father wouldn't hear it, wouldn't tolerate it, would turn it back on you. Virginia Satir taught that when children can't express their true feelings, especially anger, they don't stop feeling. They just turn those feelings inward, and what was meant to be released becomes illness. Not always physical. Sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes depression, sometimes chronic guilt, shame, or the feeling that something is wrong with you, but you can't name it. Maybe you weren't allowed to be angry. Maybe when your father disappointed you, hurt you, ignored you, or humiliated you, you were told, "Don't talk back. Be grateful. He's your father, show respect." So you swallowed your rage. You told yourself, it's not a big deal. You became the peacekeeper, the quiet one, the one who never starts a fight, even if you're dying inside. But anger doesn't disappear. It transforms into self-criticism, into low self-worth, into the inability to say no without guilt, into migraines, stomach aches, insomnia, burnout. Virginia Satir believed that anger is a healthy signal, a sign that a boundary has been crossed, a need has been ignored, a part of you has been violated. But if you were taught that anger makes you bad, disrespectful, or dangerous, then you learn to mistrust your own truth. And that's the real tragedy. You start apologizing for your feelings. You start suppressing your voice. You stay in relationships where you're not seen, just to avoid the conflict you were never allowed to have. Maybe you're angry now and don't even know it. Maybe it's showing up as exhaustion, as emotional numbness, as a constant need to be okay when you're clearly not. Because that's what happens when the body carries the emotions the soul wasn't allowed to express. So let's name it. Let's break the silence. If your father hurt you, you're allowed to be angry. If he dismissed you, you're allowed to be angry. If he never protected you, never heard you, never respected you, you are allowed to be angry. That doesn't mean you're stuck in the past. It means you're finally telling the truth. Satir reminds us, healing doesn't come from pretending you're not hurt. It comes from honoring your pain. Anger is not the enemy. Repression is. Because repressed anger turns your body into a battlefield, turns your heart into a cage, turns your spirit into a whisper. You have the right to raise your voice, even if no one hears it. You have the right to cry, even if it makes others uncomfortable. You have the right to say, that wasn't okay, and it hurt me. That's not weakness, that's strength. It takes courage to feel, to allow the emotions you've spent a lifetime pushing down, to grieve the childhood you didn't get, to look at the man you called father and say, you didn't protect me the way I needed. Not because you want revenge, but because you want to heal. And healing starts with honesty. So give yourself permission. Write the words you never got to say. Scream in a safe space. Cry without shame. Break the silence, not to destroy the past, but to free yourself from it. Because you don't have to carry this pain in your body anymore. You don't have to keep pretending you're fine. You don't have to live sick with words unspoken. You were a child. You had needs. You had boundaries. You had emotions. And just because your father couldn't hold them doesn't mean they didn't matter. Now, you get to hold them. Now, you get to feel. Now, you get to heal. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's understanding. Let's talk about a word that makes many people uncomfortable. Forgiveness. When someone says, you need to forgive your father, it can feel like a betrayal. You might think, but he never said sorry. But he doesn't even see what he did. But he doesn't think he did anything wrong. And maybe he didn't. Maybe your father still believes he did everything right. Maybe he sees your silence as peace. Maybe he thinks his distance, his control, his coldness were signs of discipline, not harm. So the question is, how do you forgive someone who never asked for it? Virginia Satir had a different view of forgiveness. She didn't see it as erasing the past. She saw it as transforming your relationship with the pain. Not pretending it didn't happen, not excusing it, not waiting for the person to admit guilt. Forgiveness, for her, was never about them. It was about you, your freedom, your peace, your power to stop being shaped by the wound. Because here's what happens when you don't forgive. You stay entangled. You keep reacting to the past in the present. You let the pain write your story over and over again. You become what you hated, or you spend your life trying to be the opposite, but still letting it define you. Forgiveness is the moment you stop living in reaction. You stop waiting for something that will never come. You stop keeping score, and you say, I see what happened. I feel what it did to me, and I choose not to carry this pain into my future. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering with clarity and choosing freedom anyway. You might ask, but if I forgive, am I letting him off the hook? No, you're letting yourself off the hook, the one that kept dragging the past into your present. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean restoring a broken relationship. It means reclaiming your energy, taking back your voice, releasing the grip of resentment, not because he deserves peace, but because you do. Virginia Satir taught that understanding is at the heart of healing. That doesn't mean justifying what happened. It means seeing the whole picture. Maybe your father came from pain. Maybe he never learned how to connect. Maybe his way of loving was survival, not affection. But seeing that doesn't erase your pain. It contextualizes it. It helps you say, this wasn't about me. This was never my fault. This began before I was even born. Forgiveness is understanding that the story didn't start with you, but it can end with you. You can break the cycle. You can choose compassion without allowing more harm. You can find peace without pretending it didn't hurt. And here's the truth. Sometimes you have to forgive someone who will never say, "I'm sorry," who may never change, who may never see what they did. Because if you wait for them, you'll wait forever. But if you choose now, you take back your story. You stop being the child who needed him to understand and become the adult who understands herself. Satir believed that we heal when we tell the truth, feel the pain, and choose a different path. Forgiveness is one of those paths. Not the easiest, not the fastest, but one of the most freeing. So if your heart is ready, even just a little, start here. I forgive you for not being who I needed. I forgive you for the pain I had to carry. I forgive you, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much for me to carry any longer. That is not weakness. That is power. That is healing. That is you stepping out of the shadow and into the light. Forgiveness is not a one-time act. It's a process, sometimes daily, sometimes moment by moment. But each time you choose it, you loosen the chains. Each time you choose it, you choose yourself. And that is love, real love, the kind you've always deserved. Your father was just a man, wounded too. There's a moment in healing when something shifts. When you stop seeing your father as a giant, the one who could have saved you, protected you, loved you the way you needed, and start seeing him for what he truly was, just a man, not a hero, not a villain, a man, imperfect, limited, human. Virginia Satir believed that one of the most painful but liberating realizations is this: our parents were not gods. They were people with their own scars. Your father wasn't born cold. He wasn't born critical, controlling, distant, or absent. He became those things through his own wounds, through the way he was raised, through the fears he carried, through the love he never received. Maybe he grew up in a house where emotions were punished, where crying was weakness, where affection was rare, and survival was the goal. Maybe he never learned how to say, "I'm proud of you," because no one ever said it to him. Maybe he never hugged you because no one ever hugged him. Maybe he silenced your emotions because he was never allowed to have his own. Satir taught that families pass down emotional patterns like heirlooms, not intentionally, but automatically. Silence breeds silence. Shame breeds shame. Emotional neglect gets recycled as parenting. And here's the truth. Hurt people hurt people. Not always with cruelty, sometimes with absence, sometimes with distance, sometimes with fear dressed as control. That doesn't excuse what he did. It doesn't erase your pain, but it gives you something powerful, perspective. Because when you realize your father was also a wounded child, you stop personalizing his behavior. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What happened to him?" You see the cracks in the man you once thought was unshakable. You understand that his anger wasn't about you. His silence wasn't about your worth. His absence wasn't a reflection of your value. It was his own emotional survival strategy. And unfortunately, you grew up inside it. This is not about blaming his parents or excusing him or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about breaking the chain, seeing the pattern clearly so you don't continue it, so you don't pass it forward in your relationships, in your parenting, in your self-talk. Because once you see your father as a wounded man, you begin to heal the child inside you. The child who thought, "If I try harder, he'll love me. If I'm better, he'll stay. If I don't cry, he won't get angry. If I do everything right, maybe one day he'll see me." That child lived on hope. Hope that maybe the father would become what he was never taught to be. But the adult in you can see clearly now. He couldn't give what he didn't have, and he couldn't teach what he never learned. Virginia Satir would say, "The problem is not that we had wounded parents. The problem is when we carry their wounds as if they're ours to keep. You are not responsible for what your father carried. You are responsible for what you carry forward. And you can choose. You can choose to release the shame. You can choose to unlearn the silence. You can choose to give yourself what he never could. That doesn't mean you forget. It means you reclaim. You reclaim your voice. You reclaim your worth. You reclaim your identity, not as his reflection, but as your own truth. Your father was just a man. He had fears. He had wounds. He had limits. And while he shaped part of your story, he doesn't get to write the ending. That is yours. You are not the pain he passed on. You are the healing that begins with you. Emotional closure. The healing begins with you. You've walked through the silence. You've touched the absence. You've faced the anger, the confusion, the longing. And now it's time for something sacred. Closure. Not the kind where everything is resolved. Not the kind where your father changes. Not the kind where you get all the answers you were waiting for, but the kind that says, I no longer need him to heal. Virginia Satir taught that healing doesn't come from the other person. It comes when you choose to see the truth, feel the pain, and open space for something new. So let's name the truth. Maybe you will never hear him say, I love you. Maybe he'll never acknowledge the harm. Maybe he's gone, physically or emotionally. Maybe he'll never understand what you went through. And still, you can choose peace. Not because everything is fine, but because you are ready to stop carrying what never belonged to you. You were never meant to carry his silence, his coldness, his shame, his expectations, his fear. You were meant to be a child, to be held, to be seen, to be loved in a way that made you feel safe in the world. But that didn't happen, and it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. Closure begins when you stop asking, why didn't he love me the way I needed? And start saying, even without that love, I choose to love myself now. You don't need your father's permission to heal. You don't need his understanding to grow. You don't need his voice to validate your worth. You are not the child anymore. You are the one holding space for that child now. The one saying, I see you. I believe you. I will not abandon you again. And maybe, for the first time, you let that inner child cry. Let her be angry. Let her feel everything she was told to hide. Then you hold her, not with judgment, but with compassion, with tenderness, with truth. Virginia Satir said, we must not allow the wounds of yesterday to rob us of the possibilities of today. So today, choose something different. Choose to stop explaining yourself to people who never tried to understand. Choose to stop chasing approval from someone who couldn't offer it. Choose to stop molding your life around a man who couldn't meet you where you needed. Choose yourself. That's where the healing begins. Not with him, not with a conversation, not with a perfect ending, but with you, right now, saying, I survived, I grew, I felt it all, and now I choose peace. You might never get the closure you imagined, but you can create a closure that sets you free. A closure that sounds like, I no longer carry this. I no longer live from that place. I honor the pain. I honor the child, but I walk forward now. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to win anyone back. You don't need to hold on to a hope that keeps you hurting. You can let go without forgetting. You can forgive without erasing. You can heal without permission, because you matter. You always did. And maybe no one said this to you before, so let's say it now. Clearly and slowly, you didn't deserve the silence. You didn't deserve the coldness. You didn't deserve to grow up feeling unloved, unseen, or unworthy. But you survived, and that makes you powerful. That makes you worthy of love, safety, rest, and joy. So take a breath. Place your hand on your heart. Feel that pulse? That's your life. It belongs to you now, not to your father, not to the past, not to the pain, to you. This is your moment. This is your beginning. This is your healing, and it starts now.